Welcome again to our weekly roundup at Rand Swiss. Today we're going to talk about the SONA, US inflation, as well as the geopolitical situation in the Ukraine. Let's just start with the Ukraine. It does seem that that situation is calming down slightly. We are seeing, for instance, the Ukrainians come out and really trying to dampen down any kind of rhetoric. Of course, they have the most to lose if there is any kind of conflict between the Russians and the Americans, or the Russians and NATO, because they'll probably be fought in their land. And the danger to their populations and is obvious to everyone in the world. They basically come out and said that they don't know why the Americans are being so concerned. They don't think it's a major issue. They don't really believe the Russians are serious about doing anything, and all this is a bit of troop formation by the Russians. That seems to have calmed things down. At the same time, some of the rhetoric that the Americans have put out, for instance, the use of the word imminent in a release has been basically pulled back when talking about the possibility of a Russian invasion. And that does seem to show that we are going to see things calm down. That being said, we have seen President Biden have the lowest approval rating that we've seen from American president for quite some time, even lower by some measurements than Trump had. So that is a very surprising turn of events. You might not see it from the media, but his polling right now is really, really bad. And that's something I think that might cause more of a rash switch. I'm not saying any kind of conspiracy theory, but it has been shown in the past that when politicians are under pressure, they always look for an out, and one of the best outs out there is they go to war. It gives you an immediate upswing in terms of popularity, because people want to support the country. They want to be seen as patriotic, and going against the president that kind of time does seem to be unpatriotic. But that being said, it does seem that his polling numbers are really falling quite badly. And one of the main reasons for that is the fact that inflation in the US right now has risen to a 30-year high. Inflation came in this week at 7.5% for the US. Expectations were 7.3. The last number was about 7. Now we look at inflation not just at all-time high, not all-time, but at multi-decade highs, but rising as well at the moment. It does seem to show that the US economy is facing a lot of headwinds with regards to inflation. And that does mean that we are probably going to see the Fed not just act, but act more strongly than basically had been anticipated. There's a strong possibility out there in the market right now that the Fed's going to do a 50 basis point hike. That's 0.5% hike. Normally they do a quarter, 0.25, 25 basis points. But if you do a 50 basis points or a 0.5% hike, that will be a strong signal to the market that things are changing. Such a move would be incredibly disruptive to the market. We would likely see quite a strong pullback if it did occur. The rand would weaken quite strongly, because it would mean that the discrepancy between the rand's rate of return and the US dollar rate of return would be cut by 0.5%. Therefore, the dollar would be looking a lot more attractive. It would cause quite a bit of turmoil, I think, not just in markets, but in developing markets as well, and in currencies. And also, we probably see commodity prices under pressure as well if that did occur. That being said, from what I can gather, the sort of issues that are in supply chain, that causing supply chain problems at the moment, are very difficult to solve in the short term. We are talking about a lot of regulation. For instance, there are things, for instance, like you're dealing with unions at the ports. You're dealing with, tracking of carts or trailers for trucks. You're dealing with basically containers for ships that have to move back and forth. What has happened basically is this was a finely tuned machine. COVID disrupted it, and the machine basically has crashed in multiple places. To give you an idea just how beat this is, if you look at, for instance, in the US right now, one of the major issues in the ports is that they can't basically move trucks off in and out of the port quickly enough. And when they looked at why that was the case, it wasn't the truck was the problem, it was the trailers. And the trailers were basically going to places, getting stuck there, because the normal flow where the trailer would go to somewhere, drop something off, pick something up and bring it back, that was disrupted. And without the trailer having a job on the way back, they were getting stacked up in certain areas that were causing these disruptions. At the same time, we saw things, for instance, like safety regulations said you couldn't stack these containers more than, say, 3 high, and that was meaning that ships could not actually legally offload the containers and were stuck off the coast of the port, basically waiting for a place to get the container on. And to give you an idea just how bad this is, for instance, the rate of turnaround, forget something from a factory in China to basically a door in the US, from the point of delivery from the manufacturer to actually delivery at the person, is about 6 months at the moment. It's about 150 days. The actual trip from China to America takes about 15 days. That's a huge issue. And you may not know this, but there's actually a big disruptive event coming about next year. It's one of those strange, stupid, things that people at the time thought was reasonably good, but it's the wrong time for this kind of thing to come into play. Basically, what's happened is that there's a regulation set to come about next year, which requires that ships become roughly 15%, I think, more efficient in terms of fuel consumption. Not fleets, not companies, individual ships. The only way to make a ship more efficient in that time period is to make that ship go slower. The faster you go, the more expensive it is in terms of fuel production, fuel consumption. The slower you go, the less fuel you need to go. That being said, per container, if you go that much slower, more containers have to be shipped across. For instance, if you can ship a container across in one day, you can use the same container over and over again. It takes 100 days to ship the container over. You need 100 containers basically to make up the same amount of transport. Transporting 100 containers versus one container, that obviously has that implication in there. But if it does occur, this particular rule does come into play, and it's one of those weird rules that's done by an international body, but is accepted as part of some treaty by a number of countries, especially in the developed world. It would mean that you'd have to see container ships drop their speed by about 30% in this current environment in which there already are huge backlogs in supply. So this is something, again, it's something next year, hopefully, common minds prevail and we don't see this coming into real effect. And now moving on to our local market. We had the SONA this week, and when it comes to sort of a poser, he can talk a good game. That's just a fact of the matter. Chumamina, that speech was inspiring as anything. He knows how to speak. He knows how to basically give a good rousing kind of thing. And this time around, he was under pressure because, of course, of last year's July riots and so on, and of course the underperformance of the economy, and of course the corruption in the ANC, and so on and so on. The problem with Ramaphosa is that even though he can say all these nice things, he really can't deliver on them, and that's the problem that we've had. He does all these really great speeches. He does all these really great initiatives. They don't really translate into action. One of the actions he should have done, for instance, around the SONA and around, for instance, what happened last year, around the July riots, is that he should have made individual ministers responsible for those particular things, pay some kind of price for them. Rather, he just took all the blame onto the entire government, which kind of means that nobody in government, because you can't find the entire government, nobody in government in particular actually had paid a price for incompetence around it. Beckett Sela come out and say, basically, he's just a minister. Why should he get fired for the failings of the police? As if the police minister doesn't have any control of the failings of the police. It's an incredible statement, but we have seen that happen again. There has been more talk again of the basic income grant, and that is something that's very dangerous. We have seen the income grant, or kind of what the temporary grant for COVID was been in effect for the last little while, is something that I think is already going to be very difficult to remove. People don't like to have things taken away from them. Once this thing gets into play, once we have the idea of a basic income grant going out there, once it starts being implemented anywhere, we're likely to see this become a permanent feature of our South African spending. And given the current growth rate, which the IMF, by the way, has downgraded yet again for South Africa, there's absolutely no way we can afford it. So that is basically the roundup for this week. And I hope to speak to you again next week. Cheers.